They squatted behind bushes balanced over buckets, shared long benches with no walls between them, and sometimes fell in and drowned. In 1326, Richard Larracchiere climbed on his household toilet. The wood broke. He fell in and drowned in his own waste. But what happened when an entire city's sewage system became a death trap? They squatted behind bushes balanced over buckets, shared long benches with no walls between them, and sometimes fell in and drowned. In the Middle Ages, going to the bathroom wasn't just messy. It was done in front of everyone, dangerous and embarrassing. No sewers, no pipes, no privacy. So how did people handle their most basic needs? And what does that tell us about the dirt, the shame, and the nastiness of life back then before toilets and plumbing? Nature was the only bathroom. In the countryside, this was simple, a row of bushes, a dip in the field, the far side of a pasture. But in cities where the walls were high and there were lots of neighbors, simple turned into shameful. People still had the same needs, but what others expected changed. Going to the bathroom in public became against the law. People who got caught had to pay money as punishment. But most people didn't have their own bathroom. They went in buckets, clay bowls, whatever could hold what came out of their bodies. Some used special chairs made of wood with a hole cut out, sitting over a pot. Others walked through narrow streets looking for a dark corner, hoping no one would see them. In London in 1139, a beggar boy squatted in the street to go to the bathroom. A cart ran him over and killed him. The official records called him a wild person. The sad part wasn't just the accident, it was how people judged him after. Getting caught going to the bathroom in public wasn't just inconvenient, it marked you as poor, as dirty, as worthless. So the act of going to the bathroom, one of life's most natural things, became a way to measure how important you were. Where you went showed what kind of person you were. Inside medieval homes, the chamber pot waited, quiet, necessary, and shameful. It might be made of clay, tin, or even silver. Richer families hid them behind hanging cloths or inside wooden cabinets. Poorer families put them next to the fireplace or under a bed everyone shared. Everyone used them. No one talked about them. They were supposed to be private. But what was inside had to be dumped into a waste pit, onto the garbage pile, or way too often right into the street. Even though there were laws against it, many people threw waste out of windows with a careless shout, sometimes without any warning at all. Medieval streets stunk of rot, not only from farm animals and trish, but from people. It was embarrassing for the whole city, but it kept happening for hundreds of years. The chamber pot took away human dignity and turned it into liquid and stink. Even though it let people go to the bathroom indoors, it left behind a harder question. Where does the waste go when there's nowhere to put it? In a world without sewers, every full pot became a problem with no good answer. And every empty one reminded people that staying clean wasn't easy. When a bucket wasn't enough, some people used special chairs. A carved wooden seat, a hole in the center, and under it a pot waiting. It looked like furniture. Sometimes it was fancy with cushions and carvings. But the dignity was fake. Kings sat on these throne-like chairs, so did church leaders and fancy ladies. In paintings, they posed in robes. In real life, they went to the bathroom in silence behind thick curtains with servants who knew not to speak about it. Still, every pot had to be carried by hand downstairs through courtyards into the open. So even rich people had to face what poor people dealt with every day. What leaves the body doesn't leave the world. In crowded apartment buildings where walls were thin and smells traveled like gossip, waste caused fights between neighbors. It leaked into foundations. It ruined wood. It destroyed friendships. The special chairs promised privacy. But in towns built close together, privacy was never real. Behind every stone wall was the same secret. People were trying to pretend they were cleaner than they really were. A built-in toilet seemed like progress, a permanent fixture, a civilized answer to a messy need. But under those stone seats or wooden boards was a dark, silent danger, the waste pit. It held what no one wanted to see, and sometimes it took lives. In 1326, a man named Richard Laraquier climbed on top of his household toilet. The wood under him broke. He fell in and drowned in his own waste. It wasn't just a scary story, it really happened. All across London, Paris, York, and Bruges, waste pits were dangerous. They leaked into neighboring walls, they soaked into wells, they collapsed when people didn't take care of them. City councils made rules. Pits had to be lined with stone and kept at least 2.5 feet from the property line, more if the pit wasn't lined, but rules didn't fill holes and they didn't stop the rot. When a pit overflowed, people sued each other or started feuds and sometimes got diseases too. Toilets were progress, but they were also death traps. The closer people lived to each other, the more they realized how thin the line was between relief and ruin. In many medieval homes, especially those crammed into tight city spaces, the toilet wasn't under the floor but hanging from the wall. These were called guard robes. They stuck out from the second or third floor, often above a back alley or courtyard. A small seat, a hole, a straight drop down, and at the end of that drop, nothing. Just air and whatever was below. In theory, waste dropped into a pit or drain. In practice, it fell wherever. A person walking underneath at the wrong time could get covered in filth. Women carrying baskets, children chasing geese. There was no warning, no kindness. Careless landlords got fined. Laws were passed to build stone drop shafts and prevent accidents. But building cost money, and medieval builders often gambled with other people's dignity. So the waste fell every day, from every household, every floor. The smell stuck to stone. The ground became a slippery, stinking carpet. For those living below a guard robe, every day might bring a terrible smell. The medieval alley wasn't just loud and crowded, it was haunted by what fell from above, so even the sky wasn't clean. Eventually, cities realized waste needed more than walls and windows. It needed structure, so they built it. By the 1200s, towns like York passed laws. 1 toilet per neighborhood. They called them siege houses, long rows of wooden seats, holes lined up, no walls between them. They stood on bridges, at market squares near rivers. People sat shoulder to shoulder, skin against wood, the sound of water below. A 3-seated oak toilet found in London still shows the marks of use. No privacy, no shame, just bodies doing what they must. In Shrewsbury, a 15th century long house stretched across the river with 128 seats. Men and women were separated. It wasn't a luxury, it was necessary. These toilets emptied right into the flowing water. No waste pit, no shoveling, just gravity and flow. To some, it was brilliant engineering. To others, it was filth disguised as progress. Still, for poor people who had no chamber pot, no guard robe, and no privacy, a public toilet was more than wood and water. It was a place where shame could disappear in the crowd, where you weren't judged for needing to go because everyone was there for the same reason. Some cities looked to rivers for salvation. Why dig a waste pit when gravity and flowing water could carry everything away? So they built toilets right over water. Public toilets stood like docks, wooden benches above slow-moving filth. When someone relieved themselves, the river did the rest. In Shrewsbury, a long house offered 128 seats split by gender over the water's edge. In York and Exeter, bridges held holes under their stone arches. London did the same. To medieval minds, flowing water was nature's cleanser. If the eye couldn't see the waste, maybe the mind could forget it. But the truth was uglier. Waste stuck to riverbanks. It killed fish. It infected wells. It turned clean water into a silent killer. Yet for centuries, rivers remained the easiest answer to an impossible problem. They swallowed what people couldn't bear to bury. In return, they asked nothing except health and sometimes lives. Someone had to face what others flushed away. They were called gong farmers or waste cleaners. They worked in darkness, under floors, inside waste pits. They climbed into rot with buckets, rags, and rope. The work paid well, but cost a lot. They wore layers of old cloth to block the poisonous air. They carried torches that flickered near explosive gases. In 1339, one cleaner drowned in the Thames River while trying to wash off after work. Some died young, others were mocked, too dirty to marry, too necessary to ignore. Cities depended on them but gave them no respect. They were ghosts in the city machine, shoveling the stink so others could breathe easy. Their job was to erase what others pretended never happened. They weren't just workers. They were the unsung heroes of waste, pulling sin from the streets one bucket at a time. When they disappeared into the dark, few remembered their names. Even filth could make money. As public toilets multiplied, cities began renting them to private people. In 15th century Coventry, a man named William Pierre rented the public toilets of West Orchard for 9 years. He paid a yearly fee. In return, he kept the toilets clean, fixed the nearby bridge, and collected whatever fees desperate people would pay. Toilets became a business, a few coins for the right to sit, money for the privilege of relief. But what if you had nothing? For the poorest people, the beggars, the widows, the sick, fees were walls they couldn't climb, so they squatted behind barrels in alleys or between market stalls. They were fined, shamed, beaten. In death records, some were remembered not for who they were, but for where they were found, relieving themselves. To use a toilet was a mark of social class. To lack one was to be publicly dirty. In medieval cities, waste didn't just expose disease, it exposed inequality, but not everyone turned their back. Some saw in human waste the face of suffering and chose mercy. In 1309, John of Walton built a public toilet near St. Margaret's Church. In the 1420s, Richard Whittington, London's famous mayor, used his will to pay for a 128-seat toilet for the poor, placed quietly under a charity house. A widow donated coins for roof repairs. A former mayor left yearly money to keep toilets standing. These weren't grand cathedrals. They weren't monuments of stone. They were holes in benches, buckets in the dark. But they were also acts of kindness in a world where filth stuck to skin, smell, and soul. To give someone the chance to go in peace was an offering as sacred as bread or shelter. Because sometimes salvation came not from a sermon, but from a seat. Medieval toilets were more than just dirty corners or rotting pits. They showed what society hid, its shame, its divisions, its quiet cruelties. In every bucket emptied, every guard rope built too close, every child punished for relieving himself, we see a world trying to make civilized what couldn't be civilized and failing. And yet, even in waste, there were acts of mercy. That too is history, not just what people built, but what they tried to bury.